Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast from Techspace. And I'm joined today by Husayn. Husayn, would you like to introduce yourself and your company?
Hi, my name is Husayn. I'm the founder and CEO at QuenchAI.
Thank you so much for being here today. And I want to take you back actually to another company that you founded before the pandemic, which is Onfido. And that company has been through a lot of changes. And let's talk a little bit about how you started that company before the pandemic. Did you think much about work culture and how to use office space and how to kind of make your workforce feel at home?
It was the whole culture and the importance of a feeling of belonging was important from day one. The company was founded in 2010 while I was still at university. And so I helped grow it with my two co-founders over 10 years. And towards the end, we were 500 people across 8 different cities and offices and so on. So having the culture to us is very important. And a part of the culture is the space where people come together. So it was very much front of mind. But when I left in 2020, it was only 6 months post-pandemic. So most of the planning and thinking was before then.
And what changes did you see? I mean, how did you pivot during that pandemic to make sure that everybody was still kind of together as a team and working creatively whilst not actually being able to go to an office?
It wasn't easy because we were primarily all office-based, as you'd expect. And I would say, though, that from the beginning, we recognized that, look, this is going to be a time of change. But we are very fortunate as a scale-up that is part of our DNA, as it is with most scale-ups, to change. And that is much more first nature to us than most more established corporations and so on. So we had a bit of an advantage in being able to be slightly agile and so forth. And we just took it a week at a time, learned about how people are coping with being remote. One of the first things we did was set up a budget for people to kit out whether it's their bedroom or home office. And that definitely helped. And I think part of the focus on us being obviously remote identity verification in an increasingly remote working world, it just meant our volumes became even more exponential. And we had so much work to do that at least me and most of the team, that kept us occupied more than anything else. But that made it even more important so that the work from home arrangements were as comfortable as possible.
So when you set up QuenchAI, and we'll talk about what that business does in a minute, did you have a very different mindset about how to do things from the experience that you'd got from Onfido and from the pandemic?
So it was clear that times have changed, and for the most part for the better, and that we ought to adapt. I have, since COVID in particular, seen all the advantages of hybrid, but different companies and different stages and different teams within the companies have different needs. So for me, I could see quite clearly that with my new startup, QuenchAI, we're just about 15 people. And it is still quite important for us to be together as often as we can be. So we are typically at least 3 days a week in an office, and not just our London headquarters. We have a few smaller co-working space licenses in different cities. And then twice a year, we get together as a whole team. And we do a big one and then a small one. The big one is in the last week of June for a whole week. We book out a farm and we all go there as a team. We do a couple of days on strategy and then 2-3 days of team activities and so forth. So it is a constant effort to get the right balance between being together and picking up the cultural habits and so forth that you wouldn't easily be able to get remotely. But also understanding that in a remote working world, you're able to work in a more comfortable way and be just as efficient and so on and so forth. But as I mentioned, early stage, it's more important for you to be together in large part because creativity, brainstorming, all that, you tend to, I feel, do a better job if you are together. And equally, depending on your role, to, in a crude way, sort of split up, say, a sales role or growth or customer facing one versus maybe an engineering, programming, computer coding one. I have found most of our engineers are comfortable working at home and they upskill themselves, and as and when they need to, they ask for help and they're good to go, and they often prefer that. But on a sales and growth role, and even within that, if you go junior versus experienced, junior sales, they really, really benefit from being in the office. The onboarding process, learning from each other. There's a lot that goes with the water cooler conversations and being onboarded into a company and just understanding through conversation, hey, my colleague's pet is unwell. How do I react to that and so on? Especially with new joiners and junior members, because you got to remember they most recently went through a difficult university experience where they didn't even get the chance to socialize as often as they'd like to there. So we try our best to give that experience as small as we are at QuenchAI.
So how do you kind of manage that in terms of practical office space? Because if you've got a certain number of people and you know that some people will want to be in the office certain days of the week, how do you manage that?
We are now co-working, and that means so we have a permanent base, but we're lucky that we're in a space where we can book additional rooms as and when there's more of us there. There's offsites, and it's now, given that we have less time together in terms of hours in a week, it does means that we increase the quality of that. So once a month we do our team social. Every Thursday we do sort of an all hands. And whenever we're in the office, everyone knows 1 p.m. is sort of lunch hour. So make sure you don't book any meetings so that we have lunch together. And it also makes the space that you go to quite a bit more important. So there's a nice vibe, and it's more conducive to the startup creativity mindset and collaboration and so forth.
And you mentioned that, younger people need to sort of be in the office more because they're learning about the job. Have you noticed that there is also more demands from that generation in terms of expectations for work, that they want to work flexibly or they want to be in the office all the time? What are you seeing in terms of patterns from your younger members of staff?
My experience is limited in that we've only got maybe 4 junior team members. And the ones we go through an interview process. So there are things that we're looking for, such as basically the most important thing for us is how eager are you to learn? And in that category, there's a lot of enthusiasm. No, I want to be in the office. I want to learn from the founder. I want to learn from sort of this head of growth who's done it in Singapore and the US, or I want to learn from this head of products and so forth. So in our limited experience, it is more being together and learning from each other, which is wonderful because that's in some ways what we're looking for. Now, I can say myself as well, when I'm getting to know a new industry or new customer segments or so, I'm the type that, can I come to your office? Doesn't matter if it takes me 3 hours. I just being there physically, seeing, there's a lot more that you can pick up. So I have on Fridays, I work from home and I'm quite efficient. I put a lot of my sort of Zoom calls that I know will be Zoom calls on a Friday, and it makes my Fridays efficient, but it also makes me take advantage of the 4 days with colleagues in an office at the same time.
It's interesting, we're all kind of doing that, aren't we? We're kind of segmenting our weeks differently and thinking, what work should I definitely be doing at home? What work do I need to do when I kind of come in and meet people? And we're seeing companies experiment with things like the 4-day week. Is that something that you've considered?
So I have, in my previous company, when we were 500 people, well before the pandemic, we did offer that. Because we were at the stage in the bandwidth where we were able to, and we're the category leader. And so to us, it didn't really matter if you had 4 or 5 colleagues doing 4 days a week versus maybe 6 or 4 doing 5 days versus 5 doing 4 days. But in our new startup, we have 1 colleague doing 4, the rest are 5 days. And there is a thing around, again, things change depending on what industry you're in, the extent to which there's competitive pressures and the size in particular. And because we're such a small size, the pace of change is quite rapid. Customer insights is quite rapid. You might actually take a product feature and take it from 0 to something that's released potentially in like 2 weeks. So in those short sprints and cycles, you need all hands on deck. So if you're a key team member, of which in a team of 15, everyone is a key team member, we have everyone at 5 days and there's one who is at 4. But as we grow, then that option of having sort of 4 days and more flexible arrangements will, I'm sure, become common, like it did in my last company.
It's an interesting point you make there, because actually you often associate startups with being more flexible about work culture and, hybrid working. But in fact, corporates have more people. So therefore, in theory, have the ability to be more flexible about how their workforce works. But we've found that actually established companies are the ones that seem most scared of this new way of working, and perhaps the ones that are most likely to insist on people going back into the office 5 days a week. Why do you think that is?
I think it's fundamentally back to the company culture and the attitudes towards colleagues, team members, and so on. I feel that you pretty much have, if I crudely categorized into two, a startup where everyone feels empowered, has equity, is essentially an owner, and the vast majority of their drive is because they want to do it. They don't see themselves as having like a manager or a boss. They see themselves as having a team lead who's working harder than them and that they're learning from, and that they themselves want to contribute in pushing everything forward because there's a mission, and they're there to learn more than they've ever done and contribute more than they've ever done in the past. If I flip gears to large established corporates where there might be a more comfortable setting in the sense of, there's not an urgency, there's not like, next year we're going to be here or not. No, we're generating revenue and we're fine. And then there's hierarchies of management where it becomes more a case of, let me order as a manager to my subordinates, making sure that they're doing the work, quote unquote. And then the actual employees, obviously not all, but some, I've heard, I've now actually been at a corporate. It's more a case of what's the least I can do to make sure I don't get fired. And in that sort of setting, you can understand why maybe there are examples where half the workforce are gone or 3/4 are gone and the companies are just as productive as they were before. It's because they don't treat each other the way that we, I'd say, like as startups do, both in terms of empowerment, trust, equity, and so on. And essentially, a mission on why it's important to do the work as opposed to sort of a paycheck.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you think that people are more creative when they're together. That kind of makes sense. And the Techspace survey seems to sort of also find that. I think around 1/3 of CEOs said that people are more creative when they're in the office. How do you make sure that you keep that creativity flowing, given that people are not going to be in the office all the time anymore?
You naturally try your utmost when there's group settings and meetings to be had that you are together where possible. Now, if that goes onto remote settings, it just means that the chair has to be trained, and that, look, you ought to go around and make sure everyone is heard. And the important thing is to hold to diversity. And that's especially important for diversity of thought. And we have to have, like, one of our cultural values is disagree but commit. So disagree, i.e. like we want to hear anyone who thinks this particular plan or strategy isn't going to work. And then we have a good discussion. And then at the end, we all commit to it, even though some may not say this is like the right path and so on. So it's just good practices and good training. And that's also part of our AI research, which is at the early stage. But in a team dynamic of like 4 people or 5, we can tell just by a recording of how often they're speaking, and that's only a small part of it, but more importantly, the language that they're using, how productive is this team. It can be in any specific field, and it can actually, we don't even need to know the substance of what's being discussed. So that there are certain things around humility and humor and things that you can measure so that you can give specific advice in sort of ahead of the next meeting. You'd say, speaker 3, next time, if this point is raised, maybe just pause and ask for further information as opposed to shutting it down and so on and so forth. So AI can actually play a role in helping train and facilitate how one can hold creative sessions or others in a more productive way.
Now let's talk about QuenchAI, because we haven't actually spoken about what you do, and this is kind of the core of your business, isn't it? So explain a little bit about what it is, the fundamental idea behind the company.
So the ideas of QuenchAI came to me in my first startup at Onfido. We were 2 or 3 years in, and we started to hire team members. We went from 25 to 50 to 100. And I feel like we did a very good job, and especially the first 100 people that we were lucky enough to sort of invite and who joined us, and that we were able to find those who wanted to do more, wanted to learn, were high potential, high ambition, and so forth. And we helped them in every way get coaching, mentoring, go on exhibitions, conferences, get paid training, go on programs and so forth. And that we just saw them flourish and become the backbone of the company. I just then became very frustrated after that, because when we were 200 people, 300 people, 400 people, we just lost that magic or that ability. So I constantly was looking at ways, and how is it that in the first early days we were able to do this well, help upscale and so forth, but later we struggled. And I could clearly see that teams that had experienced team leads who are actually good coaches. So I'm from a family of teachers. My dad's a lecturer, my mother was a teacher, and my elder sister is also a teacher. I know, as most parents now know post-COVID, that teaching isn't something for everyone. It actually can be hard. Coaching, mentoring, and so forth. You can have a very competent team lead that may not in any way be essentially a good coach and mentor. So I could see, and I wanted to empower the sort of makers in our company, the ones that were trainers and coaches, as well as doing their day-to-day work, how they could be empowered to do more. And naturally, being a machine learning or AI company, I figured this ought to play a role. So fast forward to Quench, our focus and mission is essentially to help everyone be able to upskill and learn in a more effective way. And we do that by helping trainers, whether they're inside an organization or external to an organization going in, create essentially a AI twin of their own knowledge. So that you might have an hour with a trainer every week, but then between those sessions every week, you can query away on their AI twin, and the trainer steps in when the AI isn't able to answer a query and then sort of help them upskill.
And what role do you think that AI is going to play in the future of work? Because for a lot of people, it's seen as a threat, isn't it, as AI taking their jobs? But the picture you paint is of very much, it being an enabler and making us better at the jobs that we do.
There is a role that there are two parts to this. One, as a macro societal level, AI is the latest stage of a automation drive, which is going to continue automating industries that weren't automated in the past. And the first industrial revolution is mostly the automation of routine tasks that manufacturing and best thought of maybe as replacing the human arm, repeatable tasks. This revolution around Gen AI in particular is more repetitive cognitive functions, but not just repetitive anymore. That was machine learning, the predecessor. Creative things and things that we never even thought were possible or AI could deliver. So it will automate a lot more functions, and that means there will need to be significant changes in how we think about the world of work and so forth. But it does mean that as far as the workforce is concerned, it becomes even more important to be good at learning and being agile. And I feel that in the coming decade and beyond, it's going to be who is able to learn and adapt the best. And we don't need to do that by ourselves anymore. We can now do so by using AI to assist. And if you want to learn how to do a sales call, well, you can have an AI twin that does a role play with you. If you want to learn how to give feedback to a colleague on, hey, next time, can you help be more constructive when it comes to helping a colleague, perform or whatever that task is, you can do a role play with an AI around how to deliver feedback that is most conducive to holding to the cultural spirit and so forth. So AI can play a big role in trainers training more people and doing a better job delivering personalized learning, and at the same time, the workforce being able to be learn faster.
I kind of think that meetings is something that everybody finds a bit boring and will probably rather send a kind of AI agent to attend and then just read back the notes. Do you think that's realistic, that we're not going to attend meetings in person anymore, whether it be on Zoom or whether it be actually in an office, and we'll just get an AI to do all that and then just read through the notes? Or is that humans need to meet and still talk to each other?
I think there will always be meetings. I think judgment will become more important, and you will now be better prepared for meetings. And your AI coach 20 minutes before the meeting will assist you. So if you're presenting to the board, it will say, okay, these are the 3 ways you might want to prioritize, how you want to structure it. And more importantly, ideally, after the board meeting, you'd go and give feedback so that it can train you better next time and so forth around how it went. Or if you had permission, you could actually have the transcript recorded and it will give you very pinpoint advice and so on. So meetings, I would, again, draw a distinction between companies, and I'm going to say startups, but companies that are productive, efficient, and have good processes for how to conduct meetings that tend to be efficient and measured and so forth. Then you have corporations. where there's just meeting after meeting, often with no set agenda and outcomes and so forth. I'd like to think that AI is going to assist us. Back to the team example I shared earlier, where there's 4 or 5 people doing a brainstorming or creative session, AI can assist after the meeting next time, make these tweaks to make it even more productive so that everyone is heard and so on. You can have that with normal meetings. I mean, already you have some basic transcript work saying speaker 1 spoke 80% of the time, the other 4 of you didn't. And already that can help you be mindful of what you're doing, but it will help push meetings to deliver what it really needs to, which is sharing of key information and basically decision-making, brainstorming, whatever mode and purpose of that meeting. AI will, I'm sure, be able to assist, make them more efficient. But your question, is it going to mean that we don't need meetings? I don't think so at all. I think I believe we're going to have more meetings, but shorter in time and far more productive. But I do also believe fewer people will be in those meetings, i.e. the workforce will shrink as far as individuals needed to essentially make decisions and so forth.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you've used the word efficiency there. And one of the big issues people had with hybrid working was that, it would limit productivity. But actually it feels like this sort of new era of working has made us more efficient. And we're all starting to question how to make our businesses most productive and how to use our teams to the best. So would you say that's the kind of benefit that's come out of COVID, is that we're all really thinking very carefully about how to do things to make the workforce work in the best possible way?
There were many tools and practices that have been around for more than a decade, but weren't really adopted in the mainstream. And they just became adopted. And they were forced to be adopted as a result of COVID. So I can tell you from my experience, with identity verification, we had a handful of very, very large banks, sort of high street mainstream banks. And then we had a few others that basically said, okay, over a 12-month period, we're going to do some pilots with you. Then COVID hit, and within 12 weeks, they all were kind of more or less live, meaning it brought in urgency to, if you wanted to do something, you can. So it's been on the agenda for most of these organizations to be more, online Zoom call friendly, for instance, and to be able to run with more efficient tools. But COVID forced that change to come faster. I remember one of my relatives just having discovered WhatsApp and Zoom, and she wouldn't leave me alone. She's like, kept sending me long WhatsApp notes and so on, bless her. But I think it helped train people on how to use these tools, and that therefore led to more efficiency gains.
And at that point, communication, we were talking about it before we sat down. We are kind of always on now, aren't we? Because we tend to sort of carry around our emails and our abilities to Zoom and WhatsApp and everything else on our phones. So is the downside of that we're not able to kind of make a demarcation between work and the rest of our lives so clearly as we did perhaps before the pandemic?
Yeah, it is just generally, there's recent research around children being on social media far too long and it making them depressed and giving them anxiety and a lot of very serious addiction problems to social media and so forth. So there's that part. Then there is the issue around people going to work and feeling like they need to be available sort of 24/7. So there's some countries that are legislating for that. And as a whole, if I look at the companies that are high performing companies that I know of, my experience is mostly with startups, is they are pretty good at telling the workforce and telling the sort of the team, when you're at work, just be focused and you thrive when you are focused and you have essentially peace of mind and you're not worried about too many other things and you're not distracted. Focus is the most important thing in the absence of distraction. But in return, whether it's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, or whenever you clock out, you really need to make sure you're resting and you really must not think of work. And whether that be weekends or otherwise. Now, naturally, in a startup world, there may be a big contract on a Monday where, twice a year, everyone needs to work through a weekend, but that ought to be very rare. And in my experience, not just with Quench and prior to that Onfido, but with other companies, those who get that balance right do well for the most part, because when everyone comes on a Monday morning, they are back in the zone of work. And if you don't have this clear difference of work and non-work, then in my view, after a while, you go into a burnout phase we're basically always at a suboptimal state. You're never able to think with clarity and essentially perform.
And finally, let's go back to the office and talk about how offices have maybe changed. For one thing, people have to sort of entice people back into the office. So are we seeing the actual layouts, the physical look of offices change? And then as a sort of secondary question, we're not in them every day. So most businesses generally talk about Fridays being a day off. Should we start thinking about repurposing our offices and using that space in other more imaginative ways?
There is a whole host of office space that is now being converted in essentially co-working space and so forth. That's a trend that hopefully will continue. But beyond that, we have a massive issue. Like, what libraries being closed down, community centers being closed down, the arts, and all of those, they're basically being hollowed out. So it'd be incredible to, now that we have less use of this incredible real estate, essentially, for there to be opportunities for them to be repurposed. And there's no reason also why, in the morning, it can't be maybe an art gallery, in the afternoon, like some sort of training facility or bookable by different folk, and then in the evening, entertainment or otherwise. And it can, I think, we'll hopefully see more of this sort of hybrid approach of space, especially at a time where, again, prime real estate is less needed in its traditional 9-to-5 corporate office space, and that at the same time can be used for these other purposes.
And your offices, is there anything that you've done differently in the design of them post-COVID to entice people to come in?
I think if you're at a stage where you need to work hard to persuade your team to come in, then that's the point at which you should maybe pack in. You ought to be a state where if you're doing things right, colleagues would really want to come in. We're a small team in the new company. We have booths for private calls. So you kind of want an open place where you're all in the same room. What's the point of going into an office, right? If you're all in a different cubicle. So you all want to be in the same room, but you want to offer, back to focus and not having distractions, phone booths and meeting spaces where you can go and have a meeting very quickly, but without it distracting others. That's one of the things that we've done.
Amazing. Okay, so that's a great discussion. And actually, you're in a very unique position because you've led a company, Onfido, up to being one of the biggest exits in Europe and growing that company to 500 plus people. You're now taking those lessons and applying it to Quench. So what would be your kind of final thoughts on how to go about doing that so that your workforce is happy and you're getting the most out of them?
Well, I can say that, we're 15 people now. I feel that we are probably more productive than we were at 40 people in the last company. And that's in large part because of all the tools that are available now. We can do a lot more. But as for the key differences of sort of leaving a very large scale up and going back to a very early stage, I work with a few founders and mentors who essentially we help each other. And I've had to rethink how to do a lot of these things. So at a scale up, you're constantly delegating, but at a startup, no, you want to do most yourself. You want to be in the customer calls and essentially at the front and center of it. Equally, at a scale up, you're constantly hiring and essentially looking market share and growth. But no, at an early stage, everything has to be lean. You have to cap costs and team size until you have product market fit, until you generate revenue and things of that nature, which is actually quite different. And if you're a decade into a scale up, going into an early stage company again, you can run it as though you're at a scale up, but unless you're properly rewiring and rethinking what it was like in the early stages, you might not be getting it right. So I'm lucky in that with the help of some founders, I've actually tried my best to go back to the early days of my first startup as far as the mindset, which is actually a lot of the fun, but nowhere near as much as the anxiety.
Well, that's a good place to end. Thank you so much, Husayn, for joining me.
Real pleasure.